If you are worried you have Lyme disease, or just like the outdoors, and want the peace of mind of knowing whether you have Lyme disease or not, there is a new Lyme screening test based on decades of research by Dr. Richard Marconi, a professor at VCU Medical Center. For more information, visit glymedx.com, that's glymedx.com, or email at info@glymedx.com.
Infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Parasites are also a cause of foodborne illness, and these include protozoa, roundworms, and tapeworms. So joining me now to discuss the most common foodborne parasites in the United States is Wilson Vientos. Wilson is a microbiologist. He's an adjunct professor at Quinnipiac University, and he runs a really good website called Parasitology Illustrated, and you can find that at parasitologyillustrated.com. Hi, Wilson. Welcome to the show.
How are you?
Oh, great. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. The Centers for Disease Control list a variety of parasites that are considered the most common in this country. Clearly, the United States is not a haven for parasitic diseases, but we do have some. And some of them are protozoa, some are roundworms, and some are tapeworms. Let's go ahead and start out with Giardia. This is something that a lot of people are already aware of, but maybe not as a foodborne illness. Can you talk a little bit about how people can get Giardia?
Well, Giardia is the most common of the parasites that we encounter in our lab and most labs. It's usually contracted by handling or ingesting contaminated food that's contaminated with the cysts of the Giardia intestinalis. So basically, that's the main mode of transmission that I would say.
As far as foodborne, but it's primarily a waterborne parasite.
Primarily a waterborne. As a matter of fact, it's been found that beavers actually carry the parasite, so they're kind of a reservoir for Giardia.
Right. So hence the name beaver fever. So if you are out hiking and you're looking for some fresh water to drink or something like that, it may not be the greatest idea due to the fact that beavers could be a mile downstream and that water could be tainted. Wilson, what are the most common symptoms of Giardia?
Well, most of the time, most of the people develop abdominal cramps, upset stomach, nausea, vomiting. There might be some dehydration because of loss of fluids. Some people can even develop some other symptoms like itchy skin or hives or some swelling of the eyes and joints. But mostly they're intestinal types of symptoms.
Sure. And after you swallow some of these Giardia cysts, the infective stage, how long till you start seeing symptoms?
I would say probably within a few days, and the symptoms can last for 1 to 2 weeks, or sometimes even longer. I remember one case that I had heard of where one particular female had it for over a year. She had gone down to 90 pounds.
Wow. Until
they found out that she actually did have Giardia.
Now, there's also chronic infections of Giardia?
Yes.
Yeah.
What happens a lot of times is that the symptoms can be kind of not so bad, so people tend to treat the symptoms with anti-diarrheal medication. And what ends up happening is these patients end up developing their own chronic type of disease. And in the case of this particular woman, it wasn't until an astute physician went through her clinical history and found that every time she was submitting specimens, she was actually taking bismuth agents for the diarrhea, and that was suppressing the number of cysts that were in the sample. So people weren't being able to detect the cysts.
Now, is there any particular parts of the population that are at particular risk for Giardia?
People in child care settings are very common. Very commonly will have, there'll be outbreaks in child care settings, mostly because obviously children, they're always putting their hands, their feet, their hands in their mouths and things like that. Also people that are hiking and might be ingesting water that is not treated properly. Giardia is very resistant to chlorine, so those little chlorine tablets may not be effective that people feel so comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And usually you require filtration along with the chlorine.
Okay, well, let's go ahead. I want to talk about prevention of some of these protozoa, but I'll let you answer all that at the end after we go over the protozoa, since essentially it's the same answer for each one. Let's go ahead and go to Cryptosporidium. Cryptosporidium, people that are my age probably remember there was a massive outbreak in Milwaukee, Wisconsin through the water system there. Back in the early 90s, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Wilson, and about 400,000 people were infected. So, Wilson, go ahead and let's delve into Cryptosporidium. It's found in the soil, but it can be found in food and water. How do people get infected with this?
Again, it's mostly ingesting contaminated water that's contaminated with the cysts.
Right. Now sometimes we see this at people that we see little outbreaks at petting zoos and stuff like that, and that are linked to the crypto outbreaks.
It can. I mean, it's usually having contact with animals that might be infected, or again, it's a lot of times it's also with in child care centers, right. In jails. There have been outbreaks. Again, this is another one of those organisms that's very resistant to chlorine.
Sure.
So filtration, water filtration is really important. And in that Milwaukee case, yes. that was one of the main problems. There wasn't water filtration. It was inadequate.
Right. Now, the symptoms pretty similar to Giardia? Pretty similar. Yeah.
Watery diarrhea, stomach cramps and pain, some dehydration, nausea, vomiting, and fever.
Now, however, this really, crypto, I think, kind of became more common when the HIV/AIDS thing really took place, and we really started seeing crypto in people with weakened immune systems.
Right. A lot of these parasitic diseases really are devastating to a lot of the people out there that are either immunocompromised or have a disease that makes them immunocompromised, and this is an example of one of those organisms.
Right. Concerning the treatment, is the treatment for Giardia and crypto the same, or are they different? Are they effective?
The treatment for Giardia is
it still Flagyl?
It's pretty standard. Flagyl is very effective, but with Cryptosporidium, it's not so clear cut, especially in the immunocompromised. In immunocompetent patients, they'll treat them with a drug called nitazoxanide. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's off the top of my head.
Right.
But in the immunocompromised individuals, really the main thing is to try to control their HIV status. and try to get their T4 cells or T3 cells back up so that they're able to keep the disease in check.
Now,
so really, antiretroviral therapy in these patients are what really helps them the most.
Now, other issues with crypto is it's sometimes found in clusters and outbreaks of people that drink unpasteurized milks and juices.
That's also correct.
Yeah.
But most of the time, when we've seen it in our lab, anyways, it's usually, and I don't know if it's because if it's up in the Northeast, it's usually people that are out there hiking.
Right. Now, a few years ago, the United States was introduced to Cyclospora. There was quite a large outbreak in several states, Iowa and Texas and a few others, where hundreds of people came down with this. Can you tell us, what can you tell us about Cyclospora?
It's similar to Cryptosporidium, and as a matter of fact, they're almost similar in size. Again, not as common as Cryptosporidium. I believe the last time I saw there were about 15,000 cases per year reported to the CDC. I think that's a low ball, because both Cryptosporidium and Cyclospora for a long time weren't looked for routinely. There's a lot of tests out there for Cryptosporidium now, and as a matter of fact, Giardia and Cryptosporidium are the two that are looked for routinely in most labs.
Right.
But Cyclospora is not routinely looked for. So I'm guessing that's a low ball. I bet you it's a lot higher than that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we learned is, through the most recent outbreak a couple of years ago, that you need to really wash your vegetables and fruits and stuff.
Correct. A lot of these, actually, that's another issue. Is nowadays we really import a lot of our vegetables and fruits, and we're not privy to knowing exactly how they are fertilizing and harvesting these vegetables and fruits that come to us. So a lot of times these vegetables and fruits come infected with either Cyclospora or Cryptosporidium, and if you're not going to be washing them thoroughly, you're going to put yourself at risk.
Sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and sum up these three protozoa. Essentially, Wilson, what can my audience do to prevent Giardia, Cryptosporidium, and Cyclospora? What are the key preventive measures?
The key preventive measures with all three of these is really is washing your hands, washing your fruit, your vegetables. That pretty much that's the most important thing to do to prevent any of these parasites.
Sure, and making sure that your water supply is
one thing I'd like to mention is if
Sure.
you look in the if you look at the CDC and you look at where a lot of these actually occur, most of these diseases or parasites.
Mm-hmm.
If you look, it's mostly up in the central part of the country, north central part of the country, and I really honestly believe that the reason for that is because they do not use filtration in their water supply.
So you're saying that they rely on chlorination alone?
I'm betting that that's what it is.
Oh, okay.
They had an outbreak of Giardia not too long ago in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and that was linked exactly to that they were not filtering their water. And I remember going up there and drinking the tap water, and I could see you could see all the stuff floating in the water, and people would say, "Oh, well, the water's treated; it's okay." but obviously it wasn't being filtered.
Well, just for local listeners, let you know, periodically Tampa Bay Water does send out these reports, and it gives you all the information about lead and other different heavy metals, and they also talk about Giardia and these other protozoa. And just to put your mind at ease, yes, Tampa Bay Water does use chlorination and filtration. All right, well, so let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about Toxoplasma gondii. Now, this is way different than what we've been talking about. What do we know about toxoplasmosis as a foodborne illness and in general?
Well, most people that I know pretty much kind of link toxoplasmosis with cats,
right?
Because cats are a good reservoir for toxoplasmosis. But it's also important to note that poultry is one of those meats that can be contaminated with the toxoplasmosis cyst. So it's really important to make sure that you cook your poultry, fully cook it, in order to prevent the spread of toxoplasmosis. Now that being said, the average person isn't going to develop any symptoms from toxoplasmosis. Most of us are exposed to it in one way or another. But when you're immunocompromised, that's a different story.
Okay, and one of the big issues, of course, with toxoplasmosis is mother to fetus. Mother to fetus,
and that is why if any of your listeners that may have been, were pregnant, probably their GYN doctor probably at some time told them that asked them if they had cats, and if they did, that they shouldn't be changing the litter box. It's one of the things that they usually tell pregnant women. It's usually in the third trimester, I believe, that they're most prone to contracting toxoplasmosis.
Okay, and you're talking about people with weakened immune systems and infants born to mothers infected.
That's correct.
What kind of disease are we talking about when you talk about the severe type?
Well, with the severe type, if it's transmitted to the baby can develop some ocular symptoms. They can be born with an enlarged or small head. So there's some very serious things that can happen to the unborn infant. The pregnant mother can also have a premature birth or abort the baby. Those are really the main things.
Okay. Now, I just want to clarify one thing. You were talking about chicken. I'm looking at some notes right now, and it talks about no raw beef, pork, lamb, veal steaks. So it's a whole bunch of different meats that are a risk of toxoplasmosis.
Yeah, well, pretty much all the meats, but chicken is a really big culprit.
Okay. Now, the next parasite is something that our parents probably knew pretty well, but we don't hear much about it anymore these days, and that's Trichinella Spiralis, or the parasite that causes trichinosis. And people get infected with Trichinella how, Wilson?
It's usually contracted by eating improperly cooked or raw meat, and it's usually found most commonly in game meat. So nowadays we mostly see it in people that are hunters that cook their own game or prepare their own game, and they may not be preparing it properly, and then they end up getting Trichinella.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the fact that we don't see very much from, pork that we buy in the grocery store, the laws have changed, and you're not allowed to feed slop and garbage to pigs anymore. And I guess what happened back in the day is, that would attract rats, and the pigs would gobble up everything in there, including the rats. And Trichinella was a big problem at one time. Not anymore, but as Wilson mentioned, that hunters that are catching like wild boar or bear, or ones up north in North Canada where maybe walrus meat or polar bear meat are all the most likely causes of trichinosis nowadays. And there's not a lot in the United States. What is there, Wilson? A dozen or so cases a year? I mean, would you even know that?
Let's see. I would say probably, around 20.
Around 20, yeah. So it's really quite a rare thing, but when it does happen, I got about 2 minutes left, Wilson, until the break. Can you describe the symptomology of trichinosis, please?
Well, it's pretty vague. Some people may not even get too much of a symptom, but it's mostly the encystment or the cysts occurring in the muscles,
right?
And they can be they can cause some discomfort when the cysts start breaking apart. You may get an autoimmune type of an immune response, cause pain, inflammation. Most of the time, the treatment is either some kind of steroid, corticosteroid, but there's not much that they do for treatments for it.
Okay. And is this something that you see in your lab?
That's something that we wouldn't see in a lab. It would be something that would be seen in the pathology area, because they may take a biopsy, and then they may find it in the biopsy. Or they may send out for serological testing, which is not really done here. It's usually done in a reference lab or sent to the CDC.
Okay, great. Well, we're going through these pretty well. I got a couple more tapeworms I'd like to talk about and another roundworm. Wilson, I hope you can hold on until after the break. I got a break in about a minute and a half. But let's go ahead and talk about the Tania species. One's the beef tapeworm and one is a pork tapeworm. Obviously, it tells us where we get it from. But the more important thing is, and after the break I want you to go over this a little bit, is a condition called cysticercosis. Mm-hmm. And if you can just give us a 30-second briefing on that before we go to the break.
Well, there's two important tapeworms. There's Solium and there's Saginata. Solium being the pork and Saginata being the beef. Solium is the one that has the potential of causing cysticercosis, which can be a very serious disease in people, cause seizures and a host of other problems. So.
Yeah. And on the phone, I have microbiologist Wilson Vientos. He also runs a very good instructional website called parasitologyillustrated.com. I encourage you to check that out. And before the break, we were jumping into the beef and the pork tapeworm. And so, Wilson, people get this by obviously eating undercooked beef or undercooked pork, and there's not a lot of major symptomology to that if you get the parasite at that point. And correct me if I'm wrong. However, ingesting the egg of the Tania solium parasite, and you can continue from there.
Okay, so pretty much what happens is, like you said, the symptoms from having the actual worm, which is contracted by eating undercooked either beef or pork, the symptoms are abdominal discomfort and things like that. You get weight loss and that's not so bad. Probably worse with Saginata, because Saginata is a huge worm. It grows up to 33 feet long. around there.
Yeah.
So you may feel more discomfort with that one. But with solium, what happens is when you have solium, you have the worm. Now the worm is producing eggs, and when the person is shedding these eggs that's infected with the worm, sheds these eggs, now other people around them can ingest these eggs, and in ingesting the eggs, it's completely, totally different than ingesting the cysts and undercooked meat. Now what happens is the larva from the cysts, from these eggs, can hatch, and they actually begin to penetrate different parts of the body.
All right. Now, when the most serious form, of course, is Neurocysticercosis.
Correct. So it will spread around to different parts of the body and muscle and other tissue, but obviously the most important would be the brain. So when these people get these invasions in the brain, they end up getting these seizures, and some of them can be life-threatening.
Sure.
So that's really the most severe of symptoms.
Okay. Now, prevention of these tapeworms is eating cooked beef or pork, and is there anything else, Wilson?
Well, the main thing is in particular with Taenia solium is to make sure that when someone is infected with the tapeworm, that they be treated immediately to eliminate the tapeworm, so that they don't shed these eggs and predispose their family members or anybody around them, including themselves, because they can also be auto-infected themselves, and then therefore go into cysticercosis, which is the more serious form of the disease.
Now, is this parasitic infection becoming more common in the U.S.? Because back in the day, you rarely heard of it. It was mostly people that came up from Mexico that might have had it. Are we seeing more of this in the U.S. now?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But it's one of those neglected parasitic infections. So one of the things that I've read is that the majority of epileptic seizures that are seen in the United States are due to Neurocysticercosis, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Okay. Well, let me switch. Let's talk about another tapeworm, and it's called Diphyllobothrium latum. And tell you quite frankly, I was kind of surprised that this was actually on the CDC's list of most common foodborne parasites. I don't hear much about this anymore. What is Diphyllobothrium latum?
So Diphyllobothrium latum is also called the fish or broad tapeworm, and it's found in fish. So it's contracted by eating either raw or undercooked fish, and there are a lot of dishes out there where especially nowadays with sushi bars and things like that, where people are consuming raw fish or undercooked fish. It is one of the longest tapeworms, so this one also grows up to 30 feet long. So it's quite a large tapeworm.
And if somebody's infected with Diphyllobothrium, what are the major symptoms?
So most of the symptoms are asymptomatic, but there is, in some people, they'll develop abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, vomiting, and weight loss. One of the hallmark signatures is a vitamin B12 deficiency that can happen. So a lot of times these people will have pernicious anemia due to a Diphyllobothrium infection. And then sometimes these tapeworms can also cause obstructions of the gallbladder and intestinal obstruction as well, and heavy infections.
Right. So basically make sure you eat cooked fish, and you can avoid this parasite. Have you ever read the book by Robert Desowitz called New Guinea Tapeworms and Jewish Grandmothers?
No, I have not.
Oh, you've got to read it. It's so good. And he was kind of describing how the fish tapeworm came to be in the U.S. and essentially a lot of Scandinavian fishermen settled in the cool lake regions of Minnesota-ish, Wisconsin in the 19th century, and they fished just like they did in their native land. But while they were out fishing, they wouldn't pull in to take care of their business every time they had to go, so they would take care of that in the water. Well, that created the parasite in these lakes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in these fish. Well, how does the Jewish grandmothers get involved in all this? Well, the fish from the upper Midwest would be imported to New York City. So we had this pike and what else? Carp and other types of fish would be available for the Jewish grandmothers. And they would create these little minced balls of fish.
Yes.
And I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's gelfite fish. And yeah, there you go. And they would boil it for a while till it was done, but they like to use their own instincts. So they would pinch at it and taste it to see if it was done. So that's how it became this Jewish grandmother disease, unwittingly from Scandinavian immigrants hundreds of miles away. So it's really a fascinating story. He tells really good stories on different parasites, and I encourage everybody to read his books. He's really good. He's gone now. He died several years ago, but very good stuff. All right, Wilson, I want to close with one more foodborne parasite, and that's Anisakiasis. And you were talking earlier about sushi.
Again, this is another one. Humans are just they're incidental hosts, but basically humans acquire it by eating infected raw or undercooked seafood, whereas Diphalobacterium latum is freshwater. This is actually seafood.
And I actually knew one person that caught this, and they complained of some really, really severe abdominal pain. The symptoms of anisakiasis include what? These worms burrow through the stomach?
It's supposed to be pretty painful.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've read, actually, that it's kind of interesting, that sometimes when people actually eat infected seafood that's infected with this particular parasite, they can actually feel them actually wiggling in their throat.
Oh, nice.
So the parasite is very, very, very active. So I would imagine, yes, it's very painful.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point. I guess if it's in your mouth, you could feel it moving in your mouth. If you pull it out, you're not infected.
One of the things that they say that is a lot of times people can prevent actually acquiring it if they feel it, by pulling it out, or actually some people, it upsets their stomach so much that they'll actually throw up and prevent any further symptoms by expelling it in their vomit. But there's really no other treatment other than the fact that to get rid of it, to actually have it removed, have the worms removed.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow. Well, all right. Well, another thing about Wilson, he is quite the authority on parasitology, and that's really demonstrated on, he's got two websites. One is called parasitologyillustrated.com, and it's really this very well done parasitology reference. I encourage you to check it out. I will link to it on the website when I put up the podcast of the show. And he also has a blog called Parasitology Illustrated Blog, and on here Wilson puts up a variety of case studies. I don't know, how often do you do it, Wilson? Once a week or every 2 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, I try to do it about once a week or twice a week. I've been running a little a little late on them lately. I've had a bunch of projects that I've had to undertake at work, so it's kind of slowed me down, but hopefully I'll get back to it.
Yeah, so can you just describe to my audience a little bit about each of your websites?
The main website is mainly just more of a reference website, kind of like simplifying parasitology a little bit, so that kind of bridging the gap between the scientific person and the lay person. The blog is actual case studies, because some of them are true case studies, some of them are just case studies that I've made up. I would say it's about 75% real case studies.
From your lab?
From the labs that I've worked in.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so they're actual case studies. And the thing that I like to emphasize in these case studies is the importance of really getting into clinical history in the patient. One of my mentors was big on that, and I would say that 90% of the time he would make a diagnosis just based on the clinical history.
Right.
So it's very important. So that's one of the things that I really like about doing it, is just to emphasize that.
Yeah, these are fantastic sources, and I encourage everybody to check them out. Like I said, I'll put the links up on my website when I post the podcast on Monday morning. And Wilson Vientos, I appreciate your time and expertise, sir, and I hope you come back on the show sometime.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right, well, continuing in our... And like I said, it's parasitologyillustrated.com, and the one with the case studies is also very good, and it's called blog.parasitologyillustrated.com, and I will put the links up, and I encourage anybody that has any interest in parasitology. These are great references, and Wilson's done a really good job on these.
And don't forget to check us out at the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, the podcast, Outbreak News Interviews, which can be found on the website, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify, and the Outbreak News This Week radio show, which is aired Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the Tampa Bay area on AM 1380 The Biz, or online streaming at 1380thebiz.com. And check out our social media presence, Facebook at Infectious Disease News, and Twitter at BackDman63. Outbreak News TV is a production of The Global Dispatch. Copyright The Global Dispatch Incorporated, 2019.